Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, the 10th of November, and I'm recording the second part of my kind of session answering questions that you've sent me by email. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So here we go. So this second part will be mainly about historical and political context and early reception of the plays. Now, can you please explain the links between the texts and their historical contexts? That is, for example, 5th century Athens and ideas of democracy explored in Oedipus and Bacchae, and or the Peloponnesian War and the politics and political figures of Athens as the backdrop to Frogs. Now, it just happens that I organized this festival, Ancient Drama Festival on the Frogs and on Oedipus in the past couple of years. And actually this year we would have the Bacchae, but unfortunately we don't know whether the festival will happen. But we have Michael Scott doing lectures exactly on these topics. So and we have video recorded them and uploaded them on our Ancient Drama Festival website. So I would, instead of me repeating, I think it is better also to hear it from a historian. So for the Frogs, see Michael Scott's talk on Ancient Drama at the Ancient Drama Festival, Aristophanic Comedy and Society. And at that time also we had invited Professor Toph Marshall from the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, who at that time was finishing an introductory book to the Frogs, which has now been published by Bloomsbury, or is coming out actually in the next couple of days by Bloomsbury. And he also gave a talk on Aristophanic Comedy series Laughter, and there is a lot on the historical and political context of the Frogs there, again on the same website. So feel free to visit our website and then watch these excellent introductions. Now, of course, I understand that you want to supplement these lectures. So to supplement them, please, I would suggest that you use a chapter, or actually a part of a chapter from Mark Griffith's 2013 Aristophanes' Frogs book, which is again like Toph Marshall's book on the Frogs. It's quite, it's okay, it's a little bit more advanced, but it's quite introductory still. Okay, so it's meant for people who come to the Frogs, for the first time. In chapter 2, Aristophanes and his Athenian audience, there is this section, Athenian politics, the war and frogs, which is actually, excellent. And because Mark Griffith is a really kind of famous and established scholar, I would definitely say that your students can refer to it. Okay. Now, and this is now the book by Toph Marshall, which, as you can see here, it's coming out in December, the 11th of December. But if you want a copy, if you want a part of the book, I can happily contact Toph Marshall, and I asked him for that section if you really liked his talk. Now, going to Oedipus now, as I said, so last year's festival, 2020, we did the Oedipus, and again, we always involve colleagues from the department, and Michael always gives us the historical context. So again, he has a half-an-hour lecture on the historical context of Oedipus Rex, and I would say that once again, supplemented with readings, and on, I would say, mainly on the representation of tyranny in the Oedipus. So one of the kind of most famous and kind of more established approaches to that is the chapter Tragic Tyranny by Richard Seaford. Now, Richard Seaford, again, is probably the most, worldwide established scholar on a kind of politics and tragedy. He has his own distinct approach, but I mean, generally it is quite. I mean, it is very kind of, it's very interesting. Okay, so this chapter, Tragic Tyranny, introduces you to the portrayal of a tyrant in the Bacchae, okay, and how far this kind of comes in contrast with kind of the political ideas of the democratic polis, and similarly with Oedipus. So now, having said that, and I mentioned that in my previous lecture, I understand that some of you may come from backgrounds that kind of do not include even Greek culture and society. Okay, so I mean, you may have come to classics with a specialization in kind of Roman history. So what I would suggest, I mean, when I give you readings, I would suggest that if they come from books, or if they are books, I would say that again, you can do, in order to give yourselves a boost, you can do what is perfectly legitimate, and a lot of our and a lot of scholars do. We consult book reviews, okay, which ease you into kind of a new context. So for example, Bring More Classical Review. You can find it online if you write. So this comes from Richard Seaford's recent book. I think this comes from this Tragedy, Ritual, and Money in Ancient Greece Selected Essays. So what you read in the book review is kind of a nice, handy summary of that chapter that I would give you to read. And also with that, you can also ease your students into the argument. So this is what the chapter is about. So Tragic Tyranny takes up the implication of tyranny and Athenian tragedy and considers tyranny's representation in various tragic texts. Seaford finds that the tyrant's impiety, so there are three elements that Seaford identifies in tragic tyrants. Tyrant's impiety leading to abuse of ritual. This is a standard element that he finds in a representation of tyrants. In the case of Oedipus, I mean, we have the abuse of marriage ritual. His distrust of philoi, people close to him, resulting in extreme cases in the killing of family members. I mean, we can see that in all cases of tragic tyrants. And finally, and greed, like their relationship to money. Okay, so Seaford argues very subtly that these are not just character defects, but instruments of and to power. So these themes are central to tragedy and tragic characters, as for example, in the Agamemnon, in the Antigone. In fact, tragedy reflects the Athenian sensibilities about tyranny, okay, and their kind of recent anxiety. I mean, this anxiety projected onto the anxiety about kind of the overturn of democracy, or the sliding of democracy into a populist regime led, by kind of a tyrant, onto these kind of tragic narratives. So Athenian anxiety is about the autonomization of individuals, especially through money. Seaford also argues that Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannus refers to contemporary Athens and Athenians, not so much in specific as in generic terms. Now, this is important, especially because Oedipus Tyrannus I mean, it would really stretch it too far if we tried to apply kind of contemporary political reality on the representation of Oedipus. And in general, as a kind of a rule of thumb for kind of easing your students into kind of the question of politics in Greek tragedy, I would say that it would be a good idea to make them think about what political means in a context like Greek tragedy. So I think that the political dimension of these plays should be seen in the wider semantics of the word political. So not necessarily in direct reference to specific politicians and politics, okay, but more widely, although this is possible, okay, I mean, at the end of the Humanities, we see kind of a clear reference to the recent development of the court of Areopagus, but more widely, political in reference to what always preoccupies tragedies, okay, politics as the experience of living in a democratic community. So, so this experience of having constructed and living in and trying to maintain a democratic community always faces two significant problems with which tragedy is very much preoccupied, and these are and they are always interconnected. The problem of the individual, especially the powerful individual, when they overreach. Okay, and I mean, this may not have to do necessarily with you know, factual reality, but more so with perception. So Michael, as you will see, you know, it tells you about kind of the perception of Pericles in the 5th century and his representations in comedy and elsewhere as a tyrant. So extremely influential and powerful individuals, and always the anxiety of the democratic context. Are they overreaching? And what are we supposed to do with an individual that is overreaching? So this is without there being a direct application of kind of the the characterization of a historical, of a contemporary personality such as Pericles, without this being applied onto Oedipus. Nevertheless, it's a very present and very pertinent question about you know, the presence, the role of powerful individual in the context of the polis, and this is always, almost always connected with the problem of private oikoi, with this contrast of private and public being very central in kind of the political focus of Greek tragedy. I mean, the Greek, so Athenian democracy was created in the wake of internecine strife. So aristocratic families embroiled in internecine killing and inter rivalry. So these are recent memories that 5th century Athens has and is maintaining. And the problem of the aristocratic oikoi is always an important one. I mean, almost all Greek tragedies concern themselves with characters that come from elite, kind of powerful families, and kind of the acquisition of power, the maintenance of power, the fighting for power, the fighting for wealth as well, and influence is always a problem in there that is kind of reflected upon. I mean, in tragedies such as the Oresteia, the way it closes, it's a clear reference to, there are clear references to, you know, to these kind of democratic reforms, putting an end to aristocratic stasis. I mean, similarly, I mean, again, we see everything on a spectrum. Okay, so the Oresteia may have much more close political references. Place like Oedipus King, their political references are, as Seaford says, more generic in relation to kind of political philosophy and political discourse at the time in Athens. I mean, for those of you who kind of have thought more extensively about the problem of the household in the private and public in the context of a of a polis, of course, the problem kind of develops into other directions, and often it is the polis that sometimes is envisaged as crushing the oikos, and often gender plays a role there, and this is where we see the polis associated with kind of the male and the private oikos associated with the female being subjected to abuse, from the polis. So there is political reflection, and it goes in all directions. Okay, and it is ongoing and developing and develops in all directions. Now, I know that some of you would be disappointed by now and be thinking, but we really want something, more precise. So if you are coming kind of new into this and you want to kind of something more precise, I will give you a scanned copy of this introductory chapter in the companion to Greek tragedy. Which is it situates a 5th century tragedy into 5th century Athenian history. Now, finally, for the Bacchae, I would so we hopefully we will have our festival by the end of the year. And you can get the a talk by Michael Scott about this. But in the meantime, I would suggest that you take some ideas from this kind of short section, the Bacchae and the polis, which is from the introduction to the Bacchae, again by Richard Seaford. And this is where kind of the problem of the royal family, again is developed, and how the suppression of the overreach of the royal family is a precondition for the creation of a democratic society. So this is what Richard Seaford is telling us. The conflict is resolved in favor of Dionysus, okay, at the end of the Bacchae. Just as so often in tragedy, the destruction of a royal family ends with the foundation of cult for the whole polis. Now, this is interesting because it brings up the important connection between cult and religion and politics. I mean, we may regard these as separate from one another, but in an ancient Greek context, these are embedded into one another. So the suppression of an overreaching, abusive kind of ruler is established. I mean, and the household is established at the end with the foundation of a new cult, and that cult is the cult of Dionysus, which, as we will say in a minute, it is the par excellence cult of community, and inclusiveness. Of course, so Richard says, and so Seaford continues, this does not mean that Thebes is to be imagined as henceforth a democracy. It is rather, with its tradition of an incestuous, self-destructive ruling family, a place onto which the terrifying conflict can safely be projected. So again, as I was saying yesterday, I believe we're talking about, these plays, okay, in an exaggerated manner, and forgive me here the kind of overgeneralization, almost as thought experiments for the political concerns that the Athenian community has and has been having in the wake of the institution and the radical development of democracy. And yet Dionysus' victory in this conflict, his complete elimination of the powerful ruling household by death and exile, could hardly be seen by an Athenian audience in isolation from the politically salutary honor paid to Dionysus by an Athens ruled by law, but threatened nevertheless, especially at the end of the 5th century, by disintegration at the hands of powerful individuals. So I'll give you this section from his introduction to read and take notes. And I will also send you this chapter, which will, again, it is, from the same scholar. Richard Seaford has exercised a huge influence on our understanding of the Bacchae. This chapter, which comes also from a collection of essays, which is meant more for people coming into the Bacchae for not as scholars, but as interested public, and it explains the connection between mystic cult and politics in the Bacchae. Okay, and then again, okay, this is now part of the kind of skills that I want to convey. Okay, so one way to kind of approach and use scholarship is to use book reviews or abstracts. Okay, so in this case, so the summary is that, so in fact, Dionysus has arrived in Thebes to establish there something concrete and specific: mystic initiation. It turns out that mystic initiation is crucial for understanding many strange occurrences in the drama. Mystic initiation involves the transition from individual isolation, represented in the play by Pentheus, to joyful belonging to a community, represented by the chorus. The opposition between individual and community is of ritual origin in the play, but of political significance. So this is the connection between the two, which is essentially inextricable in the Bacchae and in tragedy in general. Going back to what we were saying, in that first slide about kind of the perennial problem of the powerful individual in the community, or the perennial problem of the powerful ruling household in the democratic community. Okay, so I think with these we can close. Look, again, I understand that some of you may have expected me to give you very specific kind of bullet point of maybe, but I believe that in such a complex issue such as reading politics in Greek drama, I think you will not find two people agreeing on exactly the same ideas. So I want to give you food, and then you turn it into what you believe yourselves. This is also, as Richard Seaford tells me often, it is sometimes, Emmanuel, if you look at people not reading tragedy politically, it's because they themselves, these scholars themselves, are not interested in politics. Some people on the spectrum of kind of political engagement, they're far more engaged. Some people are far less engaged. So, scholars differ also on that level. Okay, Richard Seaford is a kind of very politically engaged individual, and this is reflected very much in his scholarship. But, not everything may be kind of suitable to you. Okay, so I would suggest take this and convey to your students what you feel will work best, and what will work best with you. Of course, other readings, if you want to expand more, is I think this one that also is recommended by OCR. So this is a very, 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 very classic chapter by Paul Cartledge, Deep Place, Theatre as Process in civic life. So this is another chapter that I would definitely suggest consulting when you introduce your students to politics. Um, okay, in drama. Okay, so I'm moving on to the next question, which is, do the characters deserve their fate in Oedipus and Bacchae? And actually, this question has been put to me with a request for assistance towards a possible long essay question, including how to use secondary sources. I mean, so I've been trying to do this with other questions thus far, because I understand that the use of secondary sources has become kind of really important now in the exams. But I will also tell you, before I get into answering this question, that I find this a question a little bit tricky, in the sense that it is easy to give the wrong impression. Okay, and I hope that, I mean, the answer cannot be simple, and I hope that the students will not be forced to reduce these incredibly complex and fascinating tragedies to moralizing tales of faith and responsibility. So, so what I would suggest, because I say, kind of Oedipus is a complex play, and I have, and unfortunately, it has been quite kind of, reduced under the influence of the poetics of Aristotle. I mean, maybe that wasn't the intention of Aristotle, but nevertheless, kind of, it seems that for a long time scholarship was obsessed about this idea of hamartia, okay, and kind of the fatal mistake or error or flaw of character of Oedipus, which kind of might explain kind of his fate at the end. So I would like to suggest that so when you get when you kind of I would say, please see my talk on Oedipus Rex, which I call the mountain, the house, kind of the hero, fate and responsibility, which is a performance reading of Oedipus, which will give you an idea of the complexity, and also of how I think I resist kind of reading the play as well. So nevertheless, if some caveats are allowed, then it is possible to answer this question, okay, and with reference to secondary sources. And let me say it very simply, very, very kind of clearly from the beginning. Greek tragedies are not moralizing tales, okay? So if the effect of Aristotle's poetics about Oedipus's hamartia might lead a pupil to think that it's a moralizing tale, then I'm very kind of I'm not happy with that. But instead, to correct that, what I would say is that tragic heroes are largely used as vehicles. I mean, we saw earlier on how tragic heroes like Oedipus and Pentheus are used as vehicles for the plays to explore social, political, philosophical, and even cosmological issues that are pressing for the polis at this point in time. So if we see them as kind of thought experiments, if we see them as kind of vehicles for considering and reconsidering our society, our culture, then yes, I'm happy to kind of answer this question. And as we saw, to take the clear example of Bacchae to a very large degree via Pentheus, Euripides' Bacchae explores the role that authoritarian individuals can have in the community. And now, as we said before, because Dionysiac mystic cult is presented as the par excellence cult that celebrates community and communality, Pentheus' suppression of it via its distortion, I mean the way he presents it to his police, via excessive control, via a threat of incarceration and punishment, and their implementation are Pentheus' suppression then of the mystic cult is presented as fundamentally misguided. And then also, I mean, the gender plays a big role in the Bacchae with kind of the representation, I mean, with a certain association between kind of the extreme attempt for control and rule associated with the male, and then kind of I mean via Dionysus and via the role of the women, the Maenads in the play, and also via the role of kind of the old characters, Tiresias and Cadmus, in which case kind of we have a less pronounced kind of masculine element there. And you see that there is this polarity between male and female in the play. So the suppression of the female element, insofar as it is linked with the principles of the Dionysiac, is also portrayed as misguided. Okay, in no way can we argue that that kind of the female element in the Bacchae is portrayed in any way that is kind of that is kind of I mean, it may be ideologically unacceptable from the point of view of the extreme patriarchal viewpoint of Pentheus, but if on the level of gender there is a problem, the problem is to be identified with the extreme kind of male, as in kind of controlling, suppressing position of Pentheus rather than the female. So the suppression of the female element, insofar as it is linked with the principles of the Dionysiac, is also portrayed as misguided, and so is, of course, the suppression of the expressions of celebrations in a communal context and the need for ritually framed freedom. What Pentheus does is kind of largely seen as a suppression of kind of festival. Now, ultimately, Pentheus's resistance brings the opposite result. So he himself, via his passion, which starts from the point that he's almost invaded by the Dionysiac, and he becomes minded to go to dress himself as a Maenad and infiltrate the Maenads' celebration on the mountain, and he's made to parade through the streets of the city and be kind of laughed at by the police, and then ultimately he's led to kind of this horrible death by the Maenads. So that's the passion of Pentheus. Via this passion, he becomes unwillingly and tragically the first sacrificial victim. So again, we have an etiology, we have an etiological myth in the story of the Bacchae, in which Pentheus becomes the first sacrificial victim of the cult that leads to its institution as a cult in the polis. But at the same time, this makes him the first initiate then in the Dionysiac cult. Ironically and tragically, this whole passion that Pentheus undergoes is a dramatic reenactment of the passion that initiates in the Dionysiac cult undergo when they get initians in the Dionysiac cult undergo when they get initiated in the mystic cult of Dionysus. So, I mean, of course, not to the literal level that Pentheus undergoes this passion, but as part of a initiation rituals in general in kind of the ancient world and in the Greek world, and you know, a big part of kind of mystic ritual initiation is ritual disguise. Okay, so processions, subjection to ridicule, change of gender, again via disguise, and you know, I mean, some sort of kind of physical punishment, like, you know, flagellation, and ultimately kind of a certain kind of ritual death. I mean, any initiation ritual includes a certain death, because the initiant has to die as in their previous identity in order to be reborn in their new identity as an initiate. And this is exactly what the passion of Pentheus is enacting in this myth. I mean, I can tell you more if you want about this, but I mean, it is fundamental that we recognize that the whole process of what Pentheus undergoes, it is very much a dramatic reenactment of the initiation ritual that of the Dionysiac cult that is instituted for the first time in that via that myth. So his fate essentially becomes an etiological story, and a story that explains origins or reenacts origins of the eradication of a tyrannical individual or household from a polis, and at the same time the origins of the institution of the Dionysiac mystic cult. I mean, I can give you kind of the introduction of Richard Seaford's to the Bacchae if you want to read more about this. I mean, I understand that it might kind of sound as not particularly relevant to a kind of secondary school pupil, but I mean, there wouldn't be any other way that I could explain kind of the fate of Pentheus. So this is it. Ritual plays a huge role in the construction of the fate of Pentheus. And I have to say that when I teach the Bacchae to my students, you know, the kind of this ritual pattern is there, and actually the students find it, you know, quite interesting. So in that sense, only I can say that yes, Pentheus deserves his fate. I mean, his fate is designed to be deserved because Pentheus becomes the first initiate unwillingly, because the first initiate in the Dionysiac religion and the first sacrificial victim at the same time. So he is used as a vehicle for exploration of social, political, ethical, ritual, philosophical, and cosmological issues. And in that sense, yes, he deserves his fate. So for bibliography for the Bacchae, again, I would recommend, you know, as I said, Seaford, and also Charles Siegel, who also, I mean, these two kind of have been known to clash, but they actually do converge on very important issues. Now, for Oedipus, I would say see my talk, as I said, on kind of reading Oedipus via kind of performance, and also Taplin's introduction to his translation of the play, which my talk also draws very much on, and we can discuss the fate of Oedipus kind of more extensively at the Q&A tomorrow. Okay, now I hope you got what you wanted out of my answer to this question. So another question is, how much evidence do we have about how the three plays from the OCR specification were received at the time? Are they referenced in other comedies or in other contemporary sources? And I mean, I'm sure you know, and I'll start with the Frogs, which is kind of the simplest out of the three plays. I mean, we have a Hellenistic summary of the play, which comes from the peripatetic tradition, where we are told that because of its parabases and kind of the political content and the political advice given in the parabases in the Frogs, and this is also copied in kind of in the ancient life of Aristophanes. That Aristophanes was officially commended and crowned with the wreath of sacred olive, considered equal in honor to a gold crown for the lines he had spoken in Frogs about the disenfranchised. So these are the parabases of the Frogs. I'm sure that you've already encountered all of this information. I mean, unfortunately, this information comes from the Hellenistic times, and it comes from kind of the peripatetic school, so it will have its own, you know, this school has its own agenda in relation to the function of comedy. I mean, as you know, part of the agenda of Aristotle was that all genres were striving to reach a perfect form. Okay, so I mean, it may be understood that the perfect form of comedy is when it becomes really kind of socially and politically beneficial to the polis. I mean, I'm afraid that kind of, you know, comic engagement with politics doesn't quite work on that kind of simplistic way. But nevertheless, since we have the information, we're not going to kind of deny it. We'll put it, you know, up there as kind of our evidence for the immediate reception of Frogs. But with a caveat also, which you will also find in Mark Griffith's book, that I mean, we don't know whether that reperformance ever took place and what exactly the point of it was, because especially if you consider that plays were performed in other festivals as standard. Okay, so it is a misconception to think that a play was only produced once. Okay, plays really literally traveled in the context of other Dionysia, which were certainly not kind of village affairs. They were proper big festivals. So Frogs would have been performed anyway. Okay, so but okay, it may have been reperformed in the next Lenaya, again, Lenaya of 404. But I think that, you know, more importantly, what to say is that the Frogs had a staggering influence in later reception of tragedy and the shaping of tragedians' perceptions. And the way that Frogs presents Euripides and Aeschylus reflects very much what a popular perception of Euripides and Aeschylus would have been at the time, but also cements it and solidifies it. And the Frogs was although it was one of many comedies that went about literary critical issues. Nevertheless, for complex reasons, it was chosen. That particular one comedy was chosen to survive. Um, and very soon, and already we see its influence on Aristotle and the way Aristotle perceives the three tragedians is already cementing our perceptions of the three tragedians. And especially, I mean, and then later on, it seems that, we take frogs at face value. So in the 19th and early 20th century scholarship, and especially via influential classical scholars like Friedrich Nietzsche and his Birth of Tragedy, uh, um, it becomes, the frogs is really cemented as the document that captured the perception of the grand but primitive Aeschylus, the controversial and degenerate Euripides, and the happy medium Sophocles. I mean, almost forever. Okay, so I mean, so in terms of the immediate reception of frogs, I would say that this would be more interesting and more exciting. Now, okay, so because I will mention vase paintings for the other two plays as sources of immediate reception, for the frogs, we have only one kind of quite badly drawn vase painting from the Greek West, which may or may not be kind of frogs. So we don't have iconographical tradition that shows an early reception of the frogs, really. But now moving on to the Bacchae, one of the many plays that the Bacchae is, again, let's kind of dispel the impression that the Bacchae might have been just the one play that dealt with Pentheus's fate. It was one of the many plays, actually, of the 5th century and of the 4th century as well, that drew their theme on the story of resistance to Dionysus and his cult. And the earlier one, I mean, we don't know how far this is true, but it has been attributed to the father of drama, Thespis. Aeschylus certainly wrote more than so a whole trilogy on this topic, albeit not with the king. Not with King Pentheus, but with King Lycurgus, but also other plays that dramatized the story with Pentheus, as well as Sophocles, and then Xenocles, who is also another quite significant tragic poet of the 5th century, whose works did not survive. So the theme was certainly very popular. Okay, so this again is something to keep in mind and definitely to tell the students. So now, immediate reception in comedy, we don't have as such. Now, we have a reception of the theme. So we have indications that the theme was very popular. So we have a scene in Aristophanes' Thesmophoria Zeusae, a scene where the in-law is taunted about kind of the incongruence of so the poet Agathon is ridiculed by the in-law about kind of piling male and female elements of costume, which has been recognized as echoing the scene of the equivalent Bacchae of Aeschylus, which is, I mean, this kind of the element of, I mean, we've said that Dionysus transcends gender boundaries, and this is reflected in his costume. So we wouldn't be surprised that Aeschylus' own play on the resistance to Dionysus included elements about um, um, male and female gender identity, male and female costume. So this is the scene that was parodied, that is parodied in Aristophanes' Thesmophoria Zeusae. Now, I mean, there is a suggestion that um, um, uh, okay, so I think I'll leave that because it becomes too heavy. So some scholars have argued of links of the Bacchae with the frogs, and again, often we also see the opposite. So when Euripides was writing the Bacchae, he had kind of scenes of the frogs in mind. I mean, to me, this seems like too simplistic, especially kind of knowing the kind of the vibrant production of drama at the time. Like Euripides didn't need the frogs uh, to kind of compose the Bacchae. So what? Okay, it is difficult to ascertain because what the frogs to Thesmophoria Zeusae that the Bacchae draws on the Thesmophoria Zeusae. Okay, so yeah, so sorry, the other way around. So so scholars have argued for links with the frogs, but it is difficult to ascertain because of the popularity of the Dionysiac theme throughout. I mean, we may have one comedy that is so Dionysiac and one tragedy that is so Dionysiac, but it doesn't mean that other kind of dozens of comedies and tragedies were not produced in the 5th century. So Euripides and his plays were extremely popular in the 4th century, but only one vase painting that may draw on Euripides' version of the myth dramatized in the Bacchae, as we saw, has been identified, about which I spoke in the previous section. The play, the Bacchae, was canonized via its kind of official copying and inclusion in Athenian archives, along with dozens of other plays, many of which have not survived today. But this one survived effortlessly, thereafter, including with a strong place in Rome and adaptations by the poets Naevius, Pacuvius, and Accius, and all these in pre-Christian years. And we also have from the early Christian century, so 1st, 2nd century, we have a report in Plutarch that the Parthian king responsible for Crassus's military defeat and death had an actor perform the recognition scene from Euripides' Bacchae, in which Pentheus's mother Agave realized that the lion's head she was displaying proudly was actually the head of her own son, whom she killed in a Bacchic frenzy. In the Parthian performance, see the kind of the reception of the Bacchae extending beyond, and it is early, it's ancient reception of the Bacchae extending beyond the boundaries of mainland Greece. And that the actor actually held Crassus' severed head instead of a prop or mask of Pentheus' head. Okay, so I think this is very I think this is a very kind of intriguing piece of early reception. And then finally, we know that in the 5th century AD, the Euripidean version of the Bacchae was amplified and paraphrased and extended in the epic poem Dionysiaca, extensively, so over a couple of books even. Now, for Oedipus Rex, now, the early reception of Oedipus Rex. So, I mean, I mentioned before kind of quite a distortive influence that Aristotle's Poetics has had on on our kind of the way we see Oedipus Rex. I mean, the play was perceived by Aristotle as the most perfect play in which the genre of tragedy reached its telos, its kind of perfection at the end of a kind of a long development. And I mean, implicitly from then on, it was all slow decline. Okay, so I mean, kind of this is really significant as an indication for how Oedipus Rex was perceived in kind of the early years, you know, in the century immediately after. However, I mean, apart from that, which I would like you very much to keep in mind, as kind of the distorting influence of the agenda of Aristotle. So a more immediate reception of Oedipus Rex, I would say, it would be interesting for somebody to consider that actually Oedipus Rex received a sequel that has really kind of interesting intertextual kind of dialogue with Oedipus Rex, and that's Oedipus at Colonus, which was composed towards the end of Sophocles' life and career. So I mean, it is a form of reception when a play receives a sequel. Okay, another kind of significant element for I'm afraid no comedy here, but another element for reception of Oedipus, which I would consider is a vase that we find where the myth of Oedipus now is portrayed in a kind of satiric context. So we have this vase painting of a Psyche, I think, which shows a chorus of Silenuses for what the Silenus was in my previous session, like, you know, an old satire essentially. So it's got a chorus of Silenuses confronted by what is certainly a sphinx, and we assume that they are being posed the riddle of the sphinx that Oedipus in his youth was made to solve when he entered Thebes for the first time. I mean, there is, you can't, although we don't have kind of costumes or kind of clear indications of masks here, it is possible, as we said, for the viewer of this vase to connect it with with a satiric performance of a drama that drew on the Oedipus myth. But beyond that, I'm afraid we can't say anything else. Other elements of early kind of reception is that that a play by Carcines, a tragic poet in the 4th century, may have been constructed along the lines of its namesake by Sophocles, which, I mean, basically kind of could have been an homage, okay, to Sophocles, or an indication for early reception. And also, always, vase iconography should be looked at for indications of early reception, and we saw in the previous session that we have vase paintings from South Italy that derive or may be argued with quite good evidence to derive from Sophocles' play. Unfortunately, as I said, there's nothing concrete about parody of Oedipus in comedy, but the story pattern, actually, very intriguingly, so the exposure of an unwanted infant, uh, and then there is resulting into a lost identity, which is then found and kind of leads to a dramatic change in the plot. I mean, intriguingly, this would have been supremely suitable for new comedy. So, so the comedy of the 4th century. So, I would not be from which you know we only have plays by Menander, but again, that's a very small percentage of what was composed and produced. So I would say that I wouldn't be surprised if if Oedipus's king was actually received a kind of certain parodic um, version in the 4th century. Now, finally, another question. I would find it particularly helpful if you could include a discussion of the political themes specified by OCR in relation to tragedy, with political ideas and ideals, and also the position and role of men, women, and slaves in society. I mean, this is, again, a huge question, and I will save this for next time for the session tomorrow, where we may also discuss other questions that you may have. Okay, so for now, thank you very much for your attention, and I will see you tomorrow.